A weightless abyss stretching endlessly. Jack Carter had no concept of time, no awareness of how long he had been trapped in the void. The last thing he remembered was the countdown, the rush of freezing air, the slow numbness creeping through his limbs as the took hold. It was supposed to be temporary, 10, maybe 20 years at most. Just long enough for the mission to conclude. Then, with a violent jolt, the abyss shattered. A deafening alarm blared, sharp and shrill, cutting through the thick fog in his mind. His lungs seized, a deep, desperate gasp forcing its way through his throat as his body lurched awake. He coughed violently, his chest heaving as he fought for air, his muscles screaming in protest. A dull, sterile light bathed his face, his eyelids fluttering against the sudden brightness. The glass of the hissed, a rush of pressurized air escaping as the door began to slide open. His fingers clawed at the restraints, his instincts kicking in before his mind could catch up. Every nerve in his body screamed from the sudden transition from frozen stasis to rapid warmth. His vision blurred, his limbs sluggish and unresponsive. He tried to process what was happening. The room was wrong, different from what he remembered. The tech around him was unfamiliar, the displays on the walls flashing symbols he didn't recognize. The emergency indicators weren't in English, weren't in any language he had ever seen before. His heart pounded. This wasn't his ship. Through the haze of his blurred vision, movement registered. A shadow loomed over him, large and inhuman. Jack's pulse spiked, adrenaline forcing his sluggish body into action. He reached instinctively for the emergency compartment beside where his sidearm should have been. It wasn't there. A deep, guttural voice echoed through the chamber, not human, the syllables sharp and layered with an electronic undertone. It wasn't a language he understood, but the meaning behind it was unmistakable, a question. Jack forced his head to turn, his breath still shaky as his vision cleared enough to make out the figure standing over him. It was massive, at least 8 feet tall, its body covered in dark armor that pulsed with faint blue energy. Its elongated skull was alien in every sense, a sharp, angular structure with mandibles that clicked as it observed him. 2 amber eyes glowed in the dim light, studying him with something that wasn't quite hostility, but wasn't welcoming either. Jack tensed, forcing his body to move despite the lingering effects of. He braced a hand against the edge of the path, pushing himself up with slow, calculated movements. His mind raced, piecing together the impossibility of what he was seeing. He was supposed to wake up on his ship, with his crew. The figure tilted its head slightly, tapping something on its armored forearm. A holographic interface flickered to life, streams of text scrolling across it in a foreign language before suddenly shifting to English. Galactic Standard Translation initialized. Jack barely had time to register that before the next words scrolled onto the display. Subject, human male. 400 years in stasis. His breath caught in his throat. 400 years. That wasn't possible. That couldn't be possible. His pulse hammered in his ears as his mind rebelled against the information. It was supposed to be a short mission, a controlled, long enough to reach the outer colonies, establish a foothold, and return. There had been no war, no collapse, no reason for things to go wrong. And yet here he was, waking up in an alien facility, surrounded by technology centuries beyond what humanity had when he left. The alien spoke again, its voice lower now, slower, as if measuring his reaction. Jack swallowed hard, forcing his legs to steady beneath him. His training screamed at him to assess, to react, to adapt. He had no weapons, no backup, no idea what the hell had happened to his species. He needed answers. He clenched his jaw, his voice hoarse but steady as he managed to push out the only question that mattered. Where the hell am I? The alien's glowing eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time, Jack thought he saw something behind them. Recognition. The holographic display shifted again, and then the words appeared. You are aboard the Ark ship. The last known human ship was recorded 312 years ago. Your species is extinct. Jack Carter's head pounded, his mind still reeling from what he had just been told. Extinct. The word rattled in his skull like a curse, a cruel joke that refused to make sense. He had barely been awake for 5 minutes, and already reality was unraveling faster than he could piece it together. He shouldn't be here. Humanity should still be thriving, expanding, pushing deeper into the stars. Instead, he was staring at a cold, alien screen that confirmed the impossible. The massive alien who had been watching him since he woke took a slow step forward, his towering form blocking out the light from his armor pulsed faintly, blue veins of energy shifting beneath the plating. He studied Jack carefully, as if measuring his reaction. Jack could feel the weight of the silence pressing between them. "I don't believe you," Jack said, his voice still hoarse from. He forced himself to stand straight, ignoring the weakness in his limbs. "Humanity doesn't just disappear. We had fleets. Colonies. He stopped himself, shaking his head. His throat tightened. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. 400 years had passed. Whatever had happened, it was already history." Mandibles shifted slightly, and Jack swore he could see something like sympathy in the alien's glowing amber eyes. The massive creature raised a clawed hand, pressing something on his forearm. A new holographic projection flickered to life in the space between them. A war played out in flickering, grainy records. Ships, human ships, burning in the void, their sleek designs torn apart by alien weapons. Cities on distant worlds falling, their lights snuffed out by aorbital bombardments. Human soldiers, clad in armor Jack recognized, fighting in the streets, their weapons flashing desperately against an unseen enemy. He tried to find some sign of victory, some hope, but the beta footage only grew worse. The final images hit like a sledgehammer. Earth, seen from a orbit, engulfed in fire. The planet, the cradle of humanity, now a graveyard wrapped in thick clouds of ash. There was no date, no context, just the brutal, undeniable truth. Jack's breath came shallow and uneven. His fingers curled into fists. The room felt like it was shrinking around him, suffocating. He had always imagined what the future would be like when he woke up. But this wasn't the future. This was a graveyard. Voice rumbled, deep and steady. "Humanity was fearless," he said, the words now processed through the ship's translation system. "They fought against impossible odds. They would not kneel. They refused surrender." The alien warrior's gaze didn't waver. "And so they were wiped out." Jack turned his eyes away from the anger boiling beneath his skin. He refused to believe that humanity wasn't just a race of warriors, they were survivors. There had to be something left, somewhere. He stepped forward, his exhaustion forgotten. "That's not the whole story," he said, his voice hardened now. "Somebody had to make it. You don't just erase a species like that." He gestured toward the display. "You're here. That means others survived, too." Didn't answer immediately. His mandibles clicked softly before he turned, gesturing for Jack to follow. Jack hesitated for only a moment before stepping into peace beside him, his eyes scanning every inch of the corridor. The ship was massive, built on a scale far beyond human standards. The walls were lined with displays of unknown star charts, scrolling data in a language Jack couldn't read. The technology was so advanced it made his own time look primitive. After a few minutes of walking, they entered a vast observation deck. The view outside nearly stopped Jack in his tracks. Space stretched out in an infinite tapestry of light and shadow, but what caught his breath was the planet below, a world covered in metallic spires, an artificial covering the entire surface. Ships of alien origin drifted in perfect formation, traffic lanes flowing between towering constructs. It was unlike anything Jack had ever seen before. Finally spoke again. "The council will decide what happens next," he said, his tone unreadable. "Your existence changes many things. Some will see you as a threat, others as a curiosity." He turned his glowing eyes toward Jack. "A few will see you as an opportunity." Jack frowned, crossing his arms. He didn't like the sound of that. "And you?" Studied him for a long moment. I see a relic of a civilization that refused to die. His mandibles twitched in what Jack almost mistook for amusement. A man 400 years late to his own war. Jack let out a slow breath, forcing himself to think. The past was gone, but he wasn't. That meant something. He wasn't just going to sit here and let someone else decide his fate. If humanity was truly gone, then he was the last of them. And that meant he had a responsibility. His voice was calm, but his words carried weight. I don't care what your council thinks, Jack said. I care about the truth. And if there's even a chance that someone else survived, I'm going to find them. Gave a slow, knowing nod. Then prepare yourself, human, he said. Because the galaxy has changed in ways you cannot begin to imagine. Jack took one last glance at the stars, his resolve hardening. He was not the last. He refused to be. This wasn't the end of humanity. It was just the beginning of the next fight. Jack Carter stood in the center of the West Chamber, surrounded by walls of shifting data, alien scripts scrolling across glowing panels that reached high into the vaulted ceiling. The archives hummed with a quiet energy, an eerie stillness that contrasted with the chaos inside his own mind. His fingers curled into fists as he stared at the floating holographic map of the known galaxy. It was vast, far larger than what humanity had ever charted, and yet there was nothing. No markings, no recorded settlements, no trace of his people. It was like humanity had been erased from history itself. Stood beside him, his towering form still as he observed Jack's reaction. This is what remains, he said, his deep voice measured. The last records of your kind, the final remnants of the war. He extended a clawed hand, tapping a console. The holographic projection shifted, zooming in on a distant star system. The display flickered, showing wreckage fields stretching for miles, the remnants of fleets now floating as forgotten debris in the void. Jack clenched his jaw, forcing himself to absorb the images without letting the emotions overwhelm him. There has to be something, he said, his voice tight. A station, a hidden colony, anything. Mandibles twitched slightly, and he studied Jack carefully. Your people fought until there was nothing left, he said. Every colony fell, every ship burned. The enemy did not just conquer, they exterminated. He shifted the projection again, bringing up distorted, grainy footage of the final battle. Human warships, sleek and powerful, outnumbered 100-1, firing desperately into the endless waves of enemy vessels. Their weapons barely made a dent. The recordings showed the last stand of a dying race. Jack forced himself to watch, to take in every second, every last moment of resistance. It wasn't just loss, it was annihilation. His voice came out low. Who did this? Hesitated, his glowing amber eyes narrowing slightly. The records are incomplete, he admitted. The war spanned over a century. Alliances shifted. The enemy was not a single species, but a coalition of those who feared what humanity was becoming. He turned his gaze back to Jack. You were not simply destroyed. You were targeted. Jack exhaled slowly, his pulse hammering against his ribs. He knew what that meant. Humanity had been too much of something. Too aggressive. Too ambitious. Too dangerous. The galaxy had looked at them and seen a threat, and they had responded in the most absolute way possible. But that didn't mean they had succeeded. There are no confirmed survivors, continued. No existing human settlements. If any remain, they have hidden themselves beyond the reaches of known species. His mandibles shifted slightly, and his tone carried something different, something unspoken. But there are rumors. Jack's eyes snapped toward him. What kind of rumors? Took a step forward, adjusting the star map again. A new projection appeared, a distant, isolated system, far from the core of the known galaxy. There have been whispers in the outer fringes of space, he said. A ghost fleet. Ships with no allegiance, appearing and disappearing without a trace. Some claim they are scavengers. Others say they are mercenaries. He paused. A few believe they are the last remnants of humanity. Jack's pulse spiked. His mind raced, considering the implications. If even a fraction of those rumors were true, then humanity wasn't extinct. They had simply gone into hiding. Watched him carefully. You must understand the risk, he said. If these survivors exist, they have remained hidden for a reason. If you seek them, you may bring attention to something they have fought to keep buried. Jack's expression hardened. If there's even a chance that some of us survived, I have to find them. Let out a slow breath, tilting his head slightly. Then you will need a ship. Jack smirked despite the weight in his chest. I'm guessing you're not just going to hand me one. The alien warrior's mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. No, he admitted. But I may know where you can find one. Jack took a final look at the holographic projection, his resolve solidifying. He had gone to sleep believing in a future where humanity thrived. He had woken up to a galaxy where his people had been wiped out. But he refused to accept that as the end. If there was even the faintest ember of his species still burning somewhere in the dark, he was going to find it. Turned, leading the way toward the exit of the archive hall. The council will not approve of this, he said. They believe you should remain under observation. They fear what your presence could mean. Jack followed, his expression unreadable. Then it's a good thing I don't care what they think. Let out a low, approving growl. Then let us begin. As the doors slid open before them, revealing the massive expanse of the city beyond, Jack took one last glance over his shoulder at the fading star map. Jack Carter moved with purpose, his boots striking the metallic floor with each step. His body still ached from the lingering effects of, but the fire inside him burned too hard to notice. He had spent too much time catching up, too much time learning about the war he never got to fight, the people he never got to save. That changed now. Ahead of him, walked with his usual measured pace, his towering figure cutting through the organized chaos of the hangar. Mechanics worked on sleek, curved ships far more advanced than anything Jack had ever seen in his own time. Drones floated through the air, scanning hulls, making repairs. The entire facility was a marvel of alien engineering, but Jack had eyes for only one thing, away off this station. Gestured toward the far end of the docking bay, where a vessel unlike the others was stationed. It was rugged, its dark metal hull scarred from years of use. It didn't have the elegant curves of the ships, nor the pristine condition of a military craft. This was a ship that had seen combat, had survived against the odds. Perfect. Jack crossed his arms, taking it in. Not exactly, he muttered. Mandibles twitched. It is a relic, he admitted, but then again so are you. Jack shot him a look, but the warrior was already stepping forward. As they neared the ship, two figures emerged from beneath it, a pair of aliens who clearly weren't. One was short and stocky, covered in dark green plating, his multiple eyes narrowing as he spotted Jack. The other was tall and wiry, her pale blue skin nearly luminescent in the dim light. They both stared at him with curiosity, suspicion, and something else he couldn't quite place. Spoke first. This is Jack Carter, he said, his deep voice carrying authority. The human. The stocky alien let out a sharp, clicking sound. Thought you were a myth, he muttered, crossing his thick arms. Last human alive. Sounds like something storytellers make up. Jack smirked. Yeah, well, I'm not a fan of the title either. The taller alien woman tilted her head. You're looking for something, she said, her voice smooth and readable. Jack's smirk faded. I need a ship. The stocky alien let out a low laugh. Yeah? So do a lot of people. Took a step forward, his imposing frame immediately silencing any further protest. He is not a lot of people, he said. And you owe me a favor. The two aliens exchanged a glance, a silent conversation passing between them. Then, after a long pause, the stocky one sighed. Figures. Fine. You can use the ship. But I'm not giving it away for free. Jack exhaled, shaking his head. Nothing's ever free. The alien grinned. Smart human. Jack took a slow step toward the ship, running a hand over its worn hull. It wasn't a human design, but it had a certain practicality to it. It was built for survival, for combat. For people who didn't have the luxury of safe harbors. Folded his arms. Where will you go? Jack's fingers tightened against the cold metal of the hull. He had spent every waking moment since his reawakening trying to understand the past, to fill in the gaps of the war that took everything from his people. But now he had a lead. The rumors of a ghost fleet, of ships appearing and vanishing in the outer reaches of space. It might be nothing. It might be a dead end. But it might be the last remnant of his people. Jack turned to face, his expression unreadable. I go where the trail leads, he said. Studied him, his amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim hangar light. And if you find nothing? Jack hesitated, but only for a second. Then I keep looking. The taller alien woman let out a quiet laugh. Determined. You humans really don't know how to quit, do you? Jack shot her a sideways glance. Apparently, that's what got us wiped out. Silence hung between them for a moment. Then spoke again, his voice carrying a weight that Jack hadn't heard before. If you find them, if there are humans left, they may not be what you remember. Jack met his gaze, his jaw tightening. Neither am I. The warrior seemed to consider that for a moment before giving a slow nod. Then may your search bring answers. Jack turned back toward the ship, taking the first steps up the boarding ramp. The interior was just as the exterior, scuffed floors, exposed panels, flickering displays. But it felt right. It wasn't the ship he left Earth in, but it would be the ship that brought him to whatever was left of his people. As the ramp hissed closed behind him, he made his way to the cockpit, dropping into the pilot's seat. The control panels were unfamiliar, but he had always been a quick learner. He pressed a few buttons, feeling the engine hum to life beneath him. Jack took one last look at the docking bay through the standing with the others, watching him leave. They had helped him as much as they could. The rest was on him now. He tightened his grip on the controls. 400 years late,